Mr. Chair and members, House Bill 2536 exempts the sale of fine art at an auction or gallery to a non-resident for use outside the state from TPT. And with that, I'm available for questions.
Members, are there any questions? Seeing none, bill sponsor representative.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. We're going to get right to it. I have some very patient people in the audience that represent the fine art industry. If they want to come up and kind of explain why restoring this exemption is important, I think it would be informative to hear from them. And we can kind of start so we can finish quickly. Unless the lobbyists wanted to come up and make a few words. This is an exemption that existed for quite a long time. It got wrapped up in some TPT reforms bill we did a couple of years ago, and we're restoring it. Q.
I don't see you signed in, so if you could just... I must be on the wrong bill then.
Just fill out a piece of...
Oh. Got it, I see.
Rob Gallagher on behalf of a coalition of art galleries and dealers. I won't take much time because as Representative Ugenti Rita said, we have folks from the industry to sort of talk about the merits of the issue. I just want to remind the committee that this is an issue that was contained on a bill last session that did pass out of the House on a Senate bill over to the Senate and then met an unceremonious death at the end of a very abrupt ending of a session. And so we're back this year. The transaction that we're talking about that the analyst explained is a transaction that we have never historically taxed. As part of TPT reform a couple of years ago, there was language swept out of statute that led to the taxing of these types of transactions, except for the purchase and sale of automobiles, interestingly enough. But that's why we are back now to put the tax treatment of this type of transaction back to the way that it had historically been pretty much forever, other than the last couple of years. So with that, I'll answer any questions or be happy to turn it over to other folks to talk.
Are there any questions? Representative Cardenas and then Representative Cardenas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Gallagher. So this is a TPT that's applied to non-residents of the state. If they go inside the gallery and say, "I want that picture. Can I buy it?" And so that would then trigger the TPT transaction. Is that correct?
Under the existing law, Mr. Chairman,
Correct.
Mr. Cardenas?
Correct.
Yes.
And Mr. Chair, Mr. Gallagher, so what would prevent them from seeing this particular piece of art at a gallery and doing a phone call? Would that be subject to a taxation?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Cardenas, my understanding is if an out-of-state resident, say in Oklahoma, wanted to purchase fine art, and perhaps actually the industry may know this better than me, wanted to purchase art at an art auction in Arizona and made a phone call to bid and make that purchase under existing law, that would be subject to TPT.
Mr.
To that point,
No,
though, that would
Not be subject to TPT.
Correct. So
Megan is here to correct me.
that's
This
what
was
I
the
thought.
strategic career decision I made.
and
You're increasing our prayer life.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Cardenas, if you are in Oklahoma and you make a call, you would not be charged TPT, but if you were from Oklahoma and came to Arizona and were actually in the room for the auction, you would be charged TPT.
And Mr. Chair and
I knew that.
Mr. Gallagher. So what?
Or Megan.
So I think this what's surrounding this is a little unclear, right? So what prevents someone who's purchasing art from seeing this particular piece of art and saying, "I want to buy this," and then going somewhere else and making a call? I mean, that would then exempt them from having to pay TPT. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Carter, are you talking about a resident of Arizona leaving the state and...
No, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair and Mr. Gallagher. I'm talking about a non-resident here.
Okay, a non-resident, as we just talked about, who made a call.
Correct. I walk out of the room. There's no way that they could prove that I was in the state. So I'm wondering, why is this a problem?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Cardenas, yes, I mean, you could legitimately, I guess, leave the room, go out, and as long as the art dealer didn't know that you were there or who you were, then yes, they would not have to charge you that TPT.
Chairman, to that point,
Representative Gray.
if I understand this correctly, before our TPT reform, if somebody came in from out of town and bought a work of art and took it with them, there was no sales tax. We had the TPT reform. This got,
Please proceed. Please proceed.
well, as I understand it, we had, because when we had the TPT reform, we had cars and then we had artwork that were included in that then became taxable if you were from out of town and bought it here. And we got the cars exempted. So for like Barrett Jackson, people that come in and buy high-value cars, they weren't demanded to pay sales tax by the state. But we did not get the artwork put back, as I understand it, to where it was before.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, you are correct. So during the TPT reform, sales of work of art were exempt since the 70s. During that TPT reform, Senator Lesko did not realize that she was removing this exemption, which is why she agreed last year to sponsor the striker that came through this body and back over to the Senate. Unfortunately, it needed a conference committee for some other language that had nothing to do with our bill, and then the Senate signee died, so the bill died. But yes, you're absolutely correct that sale of work of art were exempt before the TPT reform. We're trying to go back to the way that it was before that.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Cardenas.
Sure, if I may.
If it's still to the point, Representative Cardenas.
Well, I just wanted to clarify that I was on that TPT task force, and when we were going through all of the process, this never came up. And this result did not come out of our TPT task force. We were not pushing to have this section included. This kind of came out of DOR. So it was never meant to be taxed through the TPT task force.
And Mr. Chair and Mr. Latino, my line of questioning isn't encouraging art gallery owners to encourage fraud. By having them simply go outside the gallery and saying just make a phone call and we'll avoid the tax, right? So, but I'm just wondering if there's a way that we can clarify that I understand what the intent of the bill is to return it to when we had it in the 1970s, but I'm just worried that the current interpretation of House Bill 2111 that we passed in 2013, there's that kind of gray area that we're not addressing in this legislation, which is what I'm worried about.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Cardenas, I actually think this bill does fix that problem. So regardless of if you come to Arizona from Oklahoma and you're in the room and buy that piece of art, or you're on the phone and you buy that piece of art, you will absolutely be treated the same, whereas right now that is not the case.
Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So for the past 2 years, or how long just 1 year, have the galleries been paying this tax?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Meyer, yes, if there was an out-of-state resident who came in
and how much has that generated for the general fund?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Meyer, when we asked DOR that question, they don't segregate TPT in that way, and so we couldn't get an answer to that.
I believe I've seen an analysis that estimates that the effect would be about $700,000.
And has it altered? Has it changed business? The answer is yes. And I'm guessing you're going to come up and tell us that it has, and why. And have people not purchased? Well, we'll ask when you get up. And what do other states do? Is it all over the board, or does everybody exempt?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Meyer, yes, most states do not collect this type of TPT. Again, we did a memo on that last year. I can share it with you, but it kind of depends on your state and what your tax law is to figure out if it's an exemption or if it's just simply not taxed. But I can provide that for you.
Any further questions? Representative Fernandez.
Mr. Chairman, I had a question, Mr. Chairman. You cited 700,000?
I've seen an analysis. I don't know. If
I don't know if I'm reading this correctly. It says last year's fiscal note, the bill would decrease the general fund revenues by an estimated 3.2 million.
That's correct. So last year's fiscal note estimated there would be 3.2 million. This analysis identifies some of the estimates that were made in that fiscal note that they feel like were mistaken. That gets to an analysis of about 700,000. Perhaps Mr. Gallagher would like to testify to that.
Mr. Chairman, the fiscal note that you're talking about, Representative Fernandez, you have to go beyond the conclusion and read what the fiscal note is assuming. The first thing they say is they have no idea what the numbers are. So what they have done is determine what the amount of fine arts sold in the United States comes to, and they took that number and said since the population of Arizona is 2% of the population of the country, that must be the Arizona share, which is not how the industry works at all. So we have done our own analysis based on some of the figures that are in there and came up with a number that's closer to 700,000. And I can share that with you, how we walked through that, but it's basically a mathematical calculation.
Mr. Chairman, and sir, at the same time, did you figure out what it would do to the Proposition 301 funds?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Fernandez, we didn't.
Because here it says it would decrease, Mr. Chairman, that it would decrease the Proposition 301 funds by 515,000.
And to that point, so it would be the same percentage of the $700,000 because Proposition 301 raised a sales tax of half a cent, sixth of a cent, and so that sixth of a cent would be applied, and so it would be the same percentage, whatever percentage 500,000 is of 3.2 million, apply that percentage to 700,000. That would be the impact on Prop 301.
Mr. Chairman, right. And I actually did do that in my office. I don't know that I wrote it down, but it comes to somewhere around $70,000.
Any further questions? We have a couple of folks signed in wishing to speak. First, Brad Richardson, if he's here.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Brad Richardson. I own Legacy Gallery of 28 years. We have a location here in Scottsdale. We also have a location in Jackson Hole and Bozeman, Montana. We also own Scottsdale Art Auction, which is, of course, in Scottsdale, and we've had that business now for 13 years. I'm going to make a bold statement. If this tax isn't changed, Arizona will cease to be a destination art market. We've been very privileged to have people flying into our state for many, many years with the purpose of looking at enjoying our communities, but also looking at art and potentially making a purchase. As the word is filtered out about this change in the way taxes are handled, it has drastically affected us. I think probably the easiest way to see the effect would be to drive down Main Street, Scottsdale, gallery after gallery after gallery. We've been there for 28 years. My wife's family actually started one of the very first galleries on that street about 50 years ago. There's always been a waiting list anytime a vacancy came about. Now we have vacancies up and down the street. And what we've lost is some of the primary galleries, some of the galleries that have been in business a lot longer than I have. And I've talked to them personally, and they said this was just the death blow. We just couldn't handle anymore. It's not been an easy business over the last few years. To address the issue of are we the only state that has this? Now, technically, I don't know how they word it, but in the art community, it's very clear that there is no other market that has the way handles sales tax to a non-resident the same way the state of Arizona is doing it now. So I'm talking about markets like Jackson Hole, which I have a gallery. I'm talking about markets like Bozeman, Montana, Santa Fe. Santa Fe doesn't have this market. And here's the problem for us as merchants, small businesses that are trying to survive. The problem is we're competing for those folks to come here. In fact, we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars advertising to bring them here. My advertising budget on my auction is over $100,000. On my gallery side, it's about $35,000. Trying to get people to come here. Well, this tax change is driving them away. As soon as the word got out for my auction, we had cancellation after cancellation of cancellation. Now, fortunately, people are smart enough to figure out how they can avoid the tax. So what do? They're absentee bidders, or they're bidding online, or they're bidding on the phone. Fortunately for us, we had a very good auction last year. But we would rather have them in the room. We'd rather have them. See, Arizona loses if they're not in the room. They're not paying bed tax. They're not paying rental car tax. It's a net loss for the state if those type of people don't come to our state and they go to other states to have that situation where they can buy. Now I hear the argument that people that can afford art can also afford the tax. The problem is, if everybody would get on the same page with use tax nationwide, we'd have no problem with this. But the problem is that most states don't enforce use tax. So they know if they buy it from my gallery in Jackson Hole or they buy it from my gallery in Bozeman, Montana, I ship it to them in Illinois, they know that they're not going to have to pay any sales tax or use tax because Illinois doesn't enforce it. Some states enforce it heavily. Some states don't enforce it at all. So what we're asking is very simple. We'd like the same exemption that the car auctions got. And hopefully we can figure out a way to get that done and not hurt this industry.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions? Thank you for... Thank you for being patient and staying here with us late in the evening.
Oh, they have been.
He's
All right, next we'll hear from Bob Edgman.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, my name is Bob Pageman. Thanks for the opportunity for me to speak. I have a gallery in downtown Scottsdale on Main Street. I'm not going to repeat what Brad just said. I'm going to make it very short and simple. The bottom line is this. No other state in this country has this sales tax. You know, we hear that, oh, you know, if we lose this tax revenue, it's going to be a disaster. Well, guess what? No other state has it. You didn't have it before. So when you remove it, it's not going to be a disaster. It's going to go back to what it was. And I reiterate, no other state has the tax. And I'm talking about blue states. I'm talking about California, New Jersey, and New York. They don't have this tax. If somebody goes to New Jersey and buy a piece of art and have it shipped to, let's say, Michigan, there's no sales tax collected. But now with this tax, if they buy it in Arizona and they ship it to Michigan, we're collecting sales tax. Now, having said that, Arizona for long has been an art destination. Thousands of people come here to buy art, so they make a trip to come to Scottsdale to buy art. When they make that trip, as Brad was explaining, they spend money on golf, on hotels, car rental, shopping. They bring money into the state. And so one by one, customers from other states that come into my gallery, once they find out about this tax, they're saying, the hell with it. I'm not going to buy art in Arizona anymore. And so if they're a serious art buyer, they just won't come to Arizona, period. They'll go to New Mexico. So congratulations, you just lost people that are going to spend money here. And I get hurt as a business. You're collecting less tax from me. And somebody in the previous meeting made a comment that, you know, fine art buyers are wealthy people. It's like yachts and helicopters and fine art in that category, so they can afford to pay the tax. Well, first of all, not all art buyers are wealthy people. You have middle-class people that buy a piece of art for $500 or $2,000, and of course many for a lot more. But here's the thing. Wealthy people did not become wealthy by being stupid. So they have other options. You know, okay, so if they're going to buy a piece for $50,000 and they're going to pay 8% tax on it, and they can go and buy it from Jackson, they're going to go to Jackson. You lost the deal anyway. And while they're in Jackson, they're going to spend money on hotels in Jackson and other items. So to me, this tax will drive galleries out of Arizona. Ultimately, you will not collect more tax because you're going to get rid of the transactions altogether. Forget about the tax itself.
And thank you.
Right.
I think we certainly get
Thank you.
the point
All
that
right.
you're making, and appreciate your testimony. Are there any questions? All right. Members, that's all the requests to speak that I see. So, Mr. Vice Chair, would you please move the bill?
Mr. Chairman, I move that House Bill 2536 do pass.
Members, is there any discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Allen. Ms. Alston. Mr. Bowers.
Please proceed.
Brad, it's good to see you. I vote aye.
Mr. Cardenas.
Mr. Chair, may I explain?
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I know this is a bill that we've been trying to fix for a few years, and I hate getting rid of an exemption from TBT. But I also feel that if we would have been able to solve this the first year this was a problem, we wouldn't have never collected the TPT, and we wouldn't have had to run into this problem where we're trying to figure out what the hit to the general fund is. So I feel your plight. So and I understand what the arguments are, although I hate seeing a loss in TBT, I know what we're trying to do, so I'm going to vote yes.
Mrs. Fernandez.
I'd like to explain my vote, Mr. Chairman. I love artwork. Again, just like Representative Cardenas, but I'm just looking at the people that signed in against this, and many of them represent schools and school districts and kids, and another hit to TPT isn't something we need. So with that, I vote no.
Mr. Gray.
Chairman, may I explain my vote?
Please proceed.
Just to make Mr. Cardenas feel a little bit better, to quote a famous Democrat, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, we need to reduce taxes to raise our revenues. And with that, I vote aye.
Ms. Mock.
Can I explain my vote?
Please proceed.
I struggle with this too because I understand the arguments for it. I understand what's currently been happening and how that affects commerce in different states. However, I really hate carve-outs. I really think that when we have a TPT sales collection, we should make sure that, barring very highly met examples, that we should be applying it evenly. And for that, I'm going to have to say no for now.
Mr. Meyer. Excuse me, you said
aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Mr. Rivero. Mr. Stevens.
Aye.
Ms. Ugenti Rita.
Aye.
Mr. Leach. Chairman Olson.
Aye. Members, by your votes of 12 aye and 2 nay, have returned House Bill 2536 with a do pass recommendation. We will now hear an explanation on House Bill 2566 from Brett.